Hello, my friends. Welcome back to English Stories Cube. I am so glad you are here with me today. Take a slow breath. Let the world outside go quiet for just a moment. Because today's story is about a man who changed the world not with an army, not with a law, not with a war, but with a small glowing rectangle that fit in your pocket. You are probably holding one right now. He did not invent electricity. He did not invent the internet. He did not even invent the computer. But he looked at technology, cold, complicated, difficult, and he asked one simple question that nobody else was asking. Why can't this be beautiful? His name was Steve Jobs. And this is not just the story of a man who built Apple. This is the story of a boy who was given away, a teenager who dropped out, a man who was fired from the company he created, and who came back and changed everything. Part 1. The Boy Who Was Given Away. The year was 1955. On the 24th of February, a baby boy was born in San Francisco, California. His mother was a young graduate student named Joanne Schiebel. His father was Abdel Fattah Jandali, a Syrian immigrant who was studying at university. They were not married. They were young. And in 1955, in America, an unmarried woman having a baby was something the world did not easily accept. Joanne made a painful decision. She gave her baby boy up for adoption. The baby was taken in by a working-class couple named Paul and Clara Jobs. They lived in a small house in the suburbs of California. Paul was a mechanic. Clara was a bookkeeper. They were not wealthy. They were not famous. But they loved the baby boy immediately and completely. They named him Stephen Paul Jobs. Paul Jobs had a small workbench in the garage. He loved taking things apart and putting them back together. He taught little Steve how machines worked. He showed him how to use tools. He told Steve that even the parts you cannot see, the parts hidden inside a machine, the parts no one will ever look at, must be made well. That lesson stayed with Steve Jobs for the rest of his life. Steve was a difficult child. He was curious about everything. He questioned everything. He got bored easily. His teachers found him impossible to manage. One teacher had to bribe him with money and candy just to make him finish his work. But he was also brilliant. So brilliant that his school wanted to move him several grades ahead. His parents said no, they did not want him to lose his childhood. By the time Steve was a teenager, his family had moved to a neighborhood called Los Altos, in the area that would one day be called Silicon Valley. And that is where everything began. Part 2. The Garage. In the 1970s, Silicon Valley was full of young men who were obsessed with electronics. They formed clubs. They shared ideas. They met in garages and community halls to talk about the future. Steve Jobs joined one of these groups. It was called the Homebrew Computer Club. Most of the people there were engineers and hobbyists who wanted to build computers for themselves. Most people. But one person there was different. His name was Steve Wozniak. Everyone called him Woz. Woz was a genius. A real genius. He could look at a circuit board the way a poet looks at a blank page, and he could build things that other people thought were impossible. Steve Jobs could not build electronics the way Woz could. But Steve had something Woz did not. He could look at what was built and immediately understand what it could become. He saw not just the machine. He saw the product. He saw the person who would use it. He saw the feeling that person would have when they held it in their hands. In 1976, in a garage on Crist Drive in Los Altos, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak started a company together. They called it Apple. They sold Jobs' Volkswagen van and Woz's calculator to raise money. Their first product, the Apple I, was just a circuit board. No case. No keyboard. No screen. You had to build the rest yourself. It was not beautiful. Not yet. But the Apple II, The next machine was different. It came in a smooth plastic case. It had a keyboard. It had color graphics. It was designed for real people, not just engineers. It was the first personal computer that ordinary people could imagine owning. Apple went public in 1980. It was one of the biggest stock market launches in history. Overnight, Steve Jobs became worth more than $200 million. He was 25 years old. Part 3. The Fall. Success did not make Steve Jobs easier to work with. It made him harder. He was demanding in a way that went beyond normal. If something was not perfect, he would say so, loudly, cruelly, in front of everyone. He made grown engineers cry. He told people their work was garbage even when it was not. He changed his mind constantly and expected everyone to follow instantly. He believed that the difference between good and great was everything, and he was not willing to accept anything less than great. But belief alone does not make you a good manager. In 1983, Apple hired a new CEO, John Sculley, a former executive from Pepsi. Jobs had recruited him personally, famously asking, "Do you want to sell sugared water for the rest of your life, or do you want to come with me and change the world?" Sculley came, but the relationship between them broke down. Jobs was working on a project called the Macintosh, a revolutionary new computer with a beautiful screen and something no computer had ever had before, a mouse and a graphical interface that anyone could use. The project was difficult. The deadlines were missed. The internal politics were bitter. And in 1985, the Apple board of directors made a decision. They removed Steve Jobs from his own company. The man who had started Apple in a garage, who had named it, who had built it, who had poured every part of himself into it, was told to leave. He was 30 years old. Think about that for a moment. What would you do if the thing you had built, the thing you had given your whole life to, was taken away from you? Part 4. The Wilderness. Steve Jobs did not disappear. But for a while, the world was not watching him. He started a new company called Next. It made powerful computers for universities and businesses. The machines were beautiful, black cubes, elegantly designed. But they were expensive. Too expensive. And Next never found the success Jobs had hoped for. And then he did something unexpected. He bought a small company from filmmaker George Lucas. The company made computer graphics for movies. It was struggling. Most people thought it was not worth much. Steve Jobs paid $5 million for it. He invested another $5 million. The company was called Pixar. Most people at the time thought this was a mistake. They were wrong. In 1995, Pixar released a film. It was the first feature film ever made entirely with computer animation. The story was about a cowboy toy and a spaceman toy who could not stand each other and slowly became friends. It was called Toy Story. It changed cinema. It changed storytelling. It changed what people believed was possible. Jobs had built something beautiful again, this time not from circuits and code, but from light and story. But that is not the ending, because something was happening at Apple. Part 5. The Return. By the mid-1990s, Apple was in serious trouble. The company had released too many products with confusing names. The computers were slow. The design was ugly. Microsoft and its Windows operating system were everywhere. People were saying Apple might go bankrupt. In 1996, Apple bought Steve Jobs' company, Next. Officially, it was to use Next's technology. But really, Apple was bringing Steve Jobs home. In 1997, he was made interim CEO. He walked back into the company he had been thrown out of 12 years earlier. He looked around at what Apple had become, and he was not happy. He cut most of Apple's product line. He canceled projects. He fired people who were not doing their best work. He told the remaining team, "We are going to start again. We are going to make things that people love." And then, in 1998, Apple released the iMac. It was a computer in a beautiful, translucent, colorful shell. It looked like something from the future. It came in colors with names like Bondi Blue and Tangerine. It was friendly. It was fun. It was designed for people who had never owned a computer before. It sold 1 million units in 6 months. Apple was alive again. Part 6. The thing in your pocket. But the real revolution was still coming. In 2001, Apple launched the iPod, a small white music player that could hold 1,000 songs. Jobs described it simply, 1,000 songs in your pocket. 7 words. That was the whole advertisement. Because sometimes the most powerful ideas are the simplest ones. In 2003, Apple opened the iTunes Store, where people could buy 1 song at a time for 99 cents. The music industry thought this would fail. It changed everything. And then, January 9th, 2007, Steve Jobs walked onto a stage in San Francisco wearing his signature black turtleneck and blue jeans. He looked out at the audience and said, "Every once in a while, a revolutionary product comes along that changes everything." And Apple has been very fortunate. It's been able to introduce a few of these into the world. He then said, "Today, we're introducing 3 revolutionary products." The first, he said, was a widescreen iPod with touch controls. The second was a revolutionary mobile phone. The third was a breakthrough internet communications device. He repeated the list. 3 products: an iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator. Pause. Are you getting it? These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device. And he held up the iPhone. The room went silent for one breath, and then the crowd exploded. The iPhone was not the first smartphone, but it was the first one that felt human. No physical keyboard, just a beautiful glass screen that understood your touch. It was designed not for engineers, but for everyone. It changed how we communicate, how we listen to music, how we take photographs, how we navigate a city, how we read, how we learn, how you are learning right now. Part 7. The Shadow. But while Steve Jobs was changing the world on stage, something was happening inside his body that he could not fix with design or determination. In 2003, he was diagnosed with cancer, a rare form of cancer in his pancreas. He kept it secret for a long time. He had surgery. He seemed to recover. He continued working. The iPhone was launched. The iPad followed in 2010, another device that people said they didn't need until they had it and couldn't imagine life without it. But the illness came back. In 2011, Steve Jobs stood on stage for the last time. He was thin. His clothes seemed too large for him. But his eyes were still bright. He was still himself, focused, demanding, impossible, visionary. He said, "We're just getting started." On October 5th, 2011, Steve Jobs died. He was 56 years old. The night he died, people around the world came to Apple stores. Not to buy anything, just to be there. They brought flowers. They brought notes. They brought iPhones and held them up, their screens glowing in the dark, like small candles. Steve Jobs was not a perfect man. He was difficult. He was cruel sometimes. He abandoned his first daughter for years before finally accepting her. People who worked with him often described him as the hardest boss they ever had. But he also believed something that very few people truly believe. He believed that the things we make can be beautiful. That technology does not have to be cold and gray and complicated. That ordinary people deserve tools that work so well, so simply, so elegantly, that they feel like magic. He once said, "Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules. You can push them, but the one thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things." He was talking about the people Apple admired, but he was also, without saying it, talking about himself. And so, my friend, the story of the boy from that garage in Los Altos comes gently to its close. Steve Jobs did not have a perfect beginning. He was given away at birth. He dropped out of college. He was fired from his own company. But he never stopped believing in the power of a beautiful idea. He once said, "You can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backward. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future." And perhaps that is something you understand. Learning a new language is not always easy. Some days, the words come. Other days, they don't. But every lesson, every story, every new word, it is a dot. You cannot always see where it is leading. But one day, you will look back, and the line will be clear. Keep going. Your dots are connecting. This is English Stories Cube. Tell me, my friend, what part of Steve Jobs' story moved you the most? Was it the moment he was fired from Apple? The return? The 7 words, 1,000 songs in your pocket? Or the moment he held up the iPhone for the first time? Leave a comment below. I read every single one. There are many more stories waiting for you here. And I will be right here when you come back. Until next time, take care of yourself, stay curious, and never stop learning.